Welcome to the Rational Optimist Podcast. AI is getting so good, so fast. It's just a matter of time until it takes all our jobs, right?
That's what everyone thinks, right? New technology destroys jobs. That claim sounds obvious. Sounds so obvious you don't even want to utter the words until you actually look at the evidence. So this week, Rational Optimist Diary coming out Sunday, I went back and I studied the history of technology, all past technological revolutions. Zero evidence technology causes mass unemployment. In fact, innovation has been the greatest job creating machine in human history, which is completely counter to what everyone believes now, that AI is going to take all the jobs.
All right, I'm going to need you to pull your head out of the economics textbook and talk to real people with real jobs today, because there's even a word for the destruction of jobs by technology, or a term, creative destruction, right? Creative destruction doesn't just apply to technologies and businesses, it applies to jobs. And so you start your essay. Why don't you talk to the audience about how you start your essay? That imagine if you knew for certain that 90% of all of today's jobs will disappear.
Yeah, so that actually, you could have said that statement in 1800 and it would have been completely true. So back then, almost 90% of Americans worked on farms, right? And they were terrible. Everyone had a job and they were absolutely terrible. It was plowing fields and planting seeds. And I actually had a conversation with my wife about this last night. It was like, we were talking about stress, and I was like, stress is like living in 1800, working 16 hours a day in a field, not knowing if you're going to survive the winter. That's stress. Yeah. This is not, modern day is not stress. Right, so 1800 or so, 90% of 80% of people work on a farm. 150 years later, or 100 years later, less than 10% of Americans worked on the land. Okay, so you could say all those jobs completely went away or were transformed. So did the 19th century and 20th century see the cause of mass unemployment? No, the total opposite. You had the greatest employment boom in human history. Those farmers, we ended up creating industries, not living off the land. They built skyscrapers, they worked in factories, they laid railroad tracks, became teachers, nurses, office workers, which shaped the modern economy. So for me, that's just such a great example of, over time, we create more jobs than we destroy, and lots to say.
So the distinction, AI does destroy jobs, and it might even destroy your job, but it will create more jobs than it destroys. So for an individual person with an individual job, they need to figure out, what do they need to do? They need to be lifelong learners. They need to be dynamic. They need to be flexible. Like, how do you make sure that if your job is the one that's destroyed, you still have a livelihood?
Yeah, so let me make very clear what I'm saying here. I'm not saying sit back and relax and everything is going to be hunky-dory. AI will absolutely destroy and transform jobs. But I think the thing I'm wanting rational optimists to understand is that right now you have as good a chance as anyone to get ahead and do amazing things with this technology. I don't believe in, we write about this stuff. We wrote a whole essay about how to use AI and the tips and tricks. The best thing you can do is not even read that essay. It's just go sign up for Claude and GPT and Grok and actually play around with these things. So I would say the thing is, yes, of course, be dynamic, but that's very general. I think you just need to get into the weeds and figure out how to use this technology, how it's going to transform your job, and how you can use it to move up the value chain. Because throughout all these examples, in history, technology basically automates the drudge work, the stuff that we don't really want to do, and allows us to do higher value tasks. That's like the true line throughout history, the true line throughout technology. So you need to understand what parts of your jobs are like Lego. They're not just one big blob, right? They're different tasks. Figure out what tasks are going to probably go away, you can handle off to the machines, and then figure out what tasks are going to become even more valuable as AI proliferates.
So I agree with you that AI will lead to unprecedented opportunity, unprecedented growth for those who seize it. But I'm afraid we are on the losing end of this argument for now, because that's an economic fact-based thing. And on the other side of the debate are stories and powerful stories about mass unemployment of truck drivers, the most common job in half of US states, for example, or mass unemployment of, God forbid, white collar jobs like accountants and lower level lawyers. I think, I don't know what you think, but I feel like this talk really ramped up when it used to be assumed that robots are going to steal the blue collar jobs. They might take the truck driver jobs or the fast food jobs, but us white collar workers are safe. But now that we have large language models and they can do almost everything a junior accountant can do or a junior lawyer can do, it's like 10 out of 10 panic mode. This is going to steal all the white collar jobs.
100%. And those are the people on the internet too, right? First of all, a historic story. So when Excel came along and VisiCalc and tools like that, it literally could do for accountants and people that work with numbers in one afternoon what used to take 2 weeks. Okay, so imagine that as a productivity increase. What happened? The number of accountants and people that work with numbers went way, way, way up. Simply because now you can use those tools, you can use financial analysis, so on and so forth, for so many more things. So I think that's going to be the case again. I think the best example of this, and something that we can, first of all, stories are powerful, right? And we need to tell better stories. That's the whole thing. Facts don't matter when you're trying to convince people. If you tell me self-driving cars are going to come along and they're going to take, all the driving jobs or whatever, the thing I find, I think, and you're right, truck drivers is the most common job in half of US states. What baffles me a little bit about saying that's going to put everyone out of a job is that I'm not sure of the breakdown here, but think about the tens of millions of people that are probably Uber drivers, right? Those jobs today only exist because of a previous technological innovation. In fact, the whole job of driving itself only exists because of the invention of the internal combustion engine. Now, there was talking about stories, talking about individual people, very interesting example recently. So, mining giant Rio Tinto comes out and automates its entire fleet of trucks at its Australian mine. Instead, so not a single driver lost their job. So basically, these drivers now remotely operate the trucks and do maintenance around the trucks and all those type of things. So I think that's a good example of, one part of the job might go away, but it doesn't all go away.
It's a good point. I can't think of an example where a technology was introduced in the past and companies just started mass firing all the workers and replacing them with that technology. Like, truck drivers may age out of the workforce. Like truck driving companies may stop hiring new truck drivers, but it's generally not how the world works. Where like the truck driving company are just going to fire all the truck drivers and flip on the autonomous trucks, and that's that.
Someone did a study of the 1950 census and there was 270 jobs in it. Only one of them went completely away, and that was an elevator operator. So you're right. Like, these jobs, they evolve into something else, right? And I think 20 years from now, there will be way more people working in the driving industry, call it, than do today. They just might not be sitting in the front seat of cars.
The unemployment rate is lower than it's ever been. And we're more technologically advanced, obviously, than we've ever been. It's a pretty important data point.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the core misunderstanding here is that, as we said, AI is going to absolutely replace some jobs, transform others. The thing is, it's always easier to look at the job today and say, oh, that job is going away. It's impossible to predict jobs that do not exist yet. Right, that's literally like seeing the future in your mind, which is impossible, right? So again, birth of the internet, or even when I was born, 30 years ago or whatever, nobody was saying millions of people are going to make millions of dollars a year being Instagram influencers. Nobody was saying that because it literally didn't exist. So the one thing I know for sure is AI and robotics and so on are going to create lots of jobs that we don't yet have names for. All these weird and wonderful things. So today, people are getting paid high six-figure salaries to do something called prompt engineering, which is literally extract more value from the AI, ask it questions in the right way. Again, that seems absolutely bonkers to someone even talking 5 years ago, right? So,
And even that example, we can only think of it because it started to happen already, and it's very closely related to AI. Where your Instagram example is like, it doesn't even really have to do so much with new technology. It's just people have more free time to be creative and to do their own thing, that all the past technological advancements have built upon themselves and allowed them to do that. So an interesting part of the conversation too is how much of a bad idea it would be to pass regulations or give certain unions too much power to preserve jobs that should not be preserved. Because while that may be good for the dock workers to not allow automated cranes to take the shipping containers off the ships, it may be good for that small group of people and their wages and their security. It's bad for the world as a whole because it would be freezing the economy at a certain point in time, and that's never a good idea. We could have froze the economy in the 1910s when coal miner was was a popular job. That would not have been a good thing.
not a good thing. Think about the downstream consequences. Maybe we never would have really gone into oil and gas, and we wouldn't have developed nuclear, and we wouldn't have developed solar. So there's so many examples of this. I mean, there was some stat recently that if the Biden AI bill had passed, it was either the new ChatGPT or the new Claude basically would have been illegal. My favorite historic example of this is governments not having foresight, passing regulations that kind of come back and look silly 2 or 3 years later. Is they had this law where any computer over a certain power was classed as a munition. So when the PlayStation 2 came out in the early 2000s, it was literally classed as ammunition, like on the government the government export control list, because the chip in the PlayStation was so powerful. And there was magazine articles at the time like, we can't ship the PS2 to Saudi Arabia and Iraq and stuff like that. It was crazy.
Supersonic flight's a good example of this too. Not allowed to fly supersonic because it's too loud. Meanwhile, we could have figured out how to fly supersonic without creating a supersonic boom, as we've done in the last year or two. Boom Supersonic has, but it took 50 years because it was illegal to fly that fast.
Yeah, absolutely. You can, that's one of the things about, saying what startups are going to exist, or I wish this certain innovation exists. It's just entrepreneurs come up with these weird and wonderful things that just out of nowhere.
It's a hard thing because you almost have to have faith. You have to have faith that capitalism will make the world slowly better over time, and it does. But unfortunately, that's not what kids learn in school. That's for sure.
That is the creative destruction that you talked about. And that's one of the great things about America. America has historically been, I talk to people in Europe and they're like, Jesus, like they don't get any holidays, or they don't, you can let people go. So, you can let people go with 1 or 2 weeks notice or whatever. Whereas here in Europe, it's like, we're going to phase them out over 6 years or whatever. And of course, sounds great until you realize the economy is much less dynamic. There's much less innovation and creative destruction. And I just hope America continues to stay that way because, on the face of it, it doesn't feel good, but ultimately everyone wins as a result.
I think that's the core of the problem, the mindset that you just hinted at between Europeans and Americans. I think a lot of people everybody wants security and certainty. People hate uncertainty. And if you were to ask a broad range of people, would you rather have a secure middle-class job that you know is never going to go away, but you have to sacrifice the dynamism of your economy? I think a lot of people would probably say yes.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And of course, that leads to a really, really bad place ultimately where we're all poorer. One of the great things about the transformation of jobs over the past, 20 years is that imagine how terrible it would have been to sign up for a job when you're 20 and retire from that same job at 60. It seems so boring. Whereas now, you're right, like working as an Instagram influencer, if you don't get up in the morning and you don't work, you don't earn any money. But my God, the amount of people that have made livings out of just really niche things. Like there's this guy on YouTube that does food challenges. He gets millions and millions of views, every single video, and presumably earns hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I often look at him. Do you remember that show? He's called Bird versus Food, but Bird Meets Food. But do you remember that show, Man versus Food?
Mm-hmm.
Right, so Man versus Food was like a TV program. He had a whole camera crew with him. This guy just travels around on his own with a handheld camera and records this stuff. I just think that's so awesome. And AI will create even more awesome jobs that allow you to be, a one-person $1 million company or whatever.
Yeah. All right, before we move on, we're going to do a role play here. I'm a 55-year-old man. I have 2 kids in college. I'm a truck driver. I make $100,000 a year. And I live in northeastern Pennsylvania where it's not all that expensive to live. So middle class, good lifestyle. Been doing well for 20 years. Why should I not be worried that autonomous trucks are going to take away my job?
Well, you know this cohort a lot better than me, so I would say you'll be better at answering this question. What I would say is that from the outside, trucking actually, I'm not saying all these jobs are going away. Certainly not tomorrow. What I would say is that what I hear about truckers is, man, it's almost like a bachelor lifestyle. You're on the road so many days a year, don't get to see the kids, you don't get to sleep in the same bed as your wife. What we're figuring out now is that you can have self-driving do the long haul stuff on freeways that go 1,000 miles, and then what's actually happening is you have this last mile thing where you need the human to take over once you come off the freeway. Those guys are getting paid as much money, if not more, and they're able to sleep in their own bed at night, and they're able to see their kids, and they're able to bring the kids to school and all that stuff. So I just think if you make trucking cheaper and enable the flow of goods to be easier and cheaper and all this stuff, you're actually going to have even more demand for human drivers, and a ecosystem around that. Maybe you have your own AI trucking company, right, that you manage instead of being in the truck. So that's what I'd say.
Good answer. I'll accept it. Last question, then we'll move on. What do you tell a younger person who does not have an established career yet, so they have less to lose? What should they be looking to do rather than, it used to be go to school, learn how to be a coder, or get your CPA and be an accountant, or get your JD and become a lawyer. That, I won't be telling my kids to do that. So what do you tell them to do?
So I think the winning strategy in the AI age is be more human. So Josh Wolf, the venture capitalist at Lux, he has this great line that's what's scarce is valuable. And in a world of AI abundance, where OpenAI Deep Research can spit out a research report, PhD level research report on any esoteric topic that you want, can do that in 10 minutes. I don't think research is valuable anymore. I don't think some of those thoughts. I think what's really valuable and what's increasingly scarce going forward is authentic humanity. Being more human is something that AI, one job AI will not replace. So we're going to write about it on Sunday, but I think it's these build in-person personal relationships. Use your imagination. Like ChatGPT, we talked about all these weird and wonderful businesses and solutions that entrepreneurs create. ChatGPT isn't waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning with a burning desire to go build X. A burning desire to build something that you've dreamt about since you're 9 years old. That is uniquely you and human. And then the third thing is just be weird. I mean, the competent, standardized work on command, leave that to the AIs. That's great. The generic thinking, the generic writing, it's going to become much less valuable. But your unique perspective of what you live, what you've done throughout your life, I think that's going to be the superpower in an AI world. So
generic work is dead. I think we'd all agree with that. I want to add to that. Especially if you're in the information sphere, content creator on the internet, which many, many more people are these days, even if you're not, the ability to be someone who people can trust, no matter your profession, I think that's huge and increasingly important. It feels like the internet, of the last 10 years, it kind of went through a phase where people were anonymous and you could maybe sell something online that you didn't really believe in and make a bunch of money and then just go away. I think that internet is coming to an end, thankfully, and people now have reputations online. And like, to give you a concrete example, there is this controversy about the Columbia student who is a Hamas supporter and is getting deported. And I woke up this morning reading a little bit about it, and I was like, well, I don't know what to think about this. I'm not an expert on it. So let me go to someone who I trust on this issue. So you go read Matt Taibbi, because I know his values are aligned with mine on free speech. I trust him. I know he's not going to lie to his readers. So you become someone that people can trust on a niche topic, and you almost can't go wrong. It's definitely not a fast ticket to success, but I think it's the odds of you being successful are highly likely.
Such a great point. Such a great point. And that's just the human element of it, which I think will become even more valuable as we go forward. There was this, I forget the economist's name, but he had this thing about jobs, which was called the O-ring model. And it was related to the Columbia shuttle disaster, which was essentially, we built the rocket 99.9% amazing, and we forgot to put the redundancy in these tiny little bolts called O-rings or whatever they were, right? And the rocket blew up. And it's basically that AI might automate around 80% of your job, but that last 20% that AI can't automate, it's going to become 10x more valuable. So I think those are the parts that you need to double down on and figure out. And whether that's the trust element or whatever it is, I think that's the key to thriving and surviving and thriving.
And there really is infinite work to be done. I think back to my personal experience, like as a writer and editor. When I first started, I would genuinely not understand how someone comes up with a different idea to write about every day. Like, how do you have so many ideas? I would run out of ideas in a month. But the longer you do it, the more it's like there's infinite ideas. I have 50 things that I'll probably never get to write about. It's the same way with work.
Completely. And the thing is that, think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like the shelter and the food. Guys, we've people think about, oh, what happens when AI takes care of everything? We're never going to take care of everything, because we just keep you wanting more and more and more stuff. That's why people have dog walkers. And imagine me telling my great grandparents I pay for bottled water or all these type of things. They'd be just like, or pay for a gym membership. That's crazy. Always find stuff to spend money on and do and want.
Let's talk about agents.
All right, so this week, big news came out. So, of course, a couple of weeks ago, DeepSeek shocked the world. China came out with basically an AI model that was as good as the leading edge US AI models, but did it for 90% less cheaper. Some people are calling this new release, the Manus AI agent, the second DeepSeek moment. Now, if you want to give people context on what AI agents are before we dive in, or what do you want to do?
AI agents, as far as I understand it, they can actually do stuff for you online, where you can, if you're planning a vacation to Italy, you can say, ChatGPT, give me an itinerary for Italy, and it writes you an itinerary, but you still have to go to Expedia and book the flights and book the hotels. AI agents, the promise of AI agents is that you can say, hey Manus, I'm going to Italy on these dates. Prioritize high quality but good value hotels, and in this city I'll splurge and stay in a nicer hotel. Go. And it just books everything for you.
Just does it for you. Instead of being prompting back and forth, the AI agent just does it for you. So that's the big difference here. I think AI agents are huge. Eventually, they're not ready now. But yeah, again, back to Manus. I think it's an impressive. So I wasn't able to access the model. I've talked to people who did access it. They tell me it's the best AI agent they've ever used, better than OpenAI Operator and Claude Computer use, but it's still extremely glitchy and not ready for prime time. I think the reason why you're not hearing as much about this as you heard about DeepSeek, at least yet, is because up until recently, you just told me before we hopped on the call, the app wasn't available to everyone. So DeepSeek, you literally just went on, downloaded the app, you could use it. Until recently, it was kind of a limited access thing. But I think the big thing is that shows you China has serious AI capabilities, shows you agents are the future.
Yeah, I tried to use Manus this morning just to try it out before we talked. And it says it's a private trial, but you enter your email address and say the reason you want to use it. It like asks you for a paragraph to explain why you want to use it, as if it's like qualifying people. So I just put 2 words. Or 3 words. Try it out. Send. 2 minutes later, I get an email back saying, thank you. You've been welcome to the trial. So I have a little bit of a feeling that there's some marketing involved in the qualification of customers there. But maybe it's because I entered my Gmail address as my login. It tried to force me to connect Manus to my Gmail, which is just not happening. That's where I draw the line, sharing that with a Chinese tech company.
Bro, the CCP is in your inbox right now. I think, so, a couple of important points on this. I think people are really underestimating China's technological capabilities. Topic for another time. But I think about how the US is also on the leading edge, right? But there's a real difference. A point Matt Ridley makes is that there's a difference between invention and innovation. And the US is great at inventing things, but when it comes to actual implementation and mass producing stuff, I would argue China actually might be ahead. It's ahead on other things like solar and batteries, American inventions. It might also be ahead on AI as well, just because they're willing to do things that are a little bit risky, or at least in the public consciousness, and just implement AI and put it into apps and put it into everyday life in ways that Americans aren't necessarily. So I think that's something to be aware of, that actually pretty soon most AI users might be in China.
That is not what I was expecting you to say. So you think that's a regulatory issue?
I think it has to do with a regulatory issue, yeah, in the sense that if you go and try to implement AI in these type of things today, you'll run into rules and regulations in America, or at least public backlash. Whereas in China, there's really none of that. And I think not even in a bad way, but they're just willing to kind of roll the dice in ways that we aren't in America. And I will point out there's kind of a historical analogy for this. So in the 19th century, Europe led the world in scientific innovation, had the best universities, most of the great entrepreneurs were there. And in fact, it was actually America who ended up commercializing and making money from all those technologies, just because it was like, hey, we're willing to roll the dice and experiment with things. And I'm hoping that's not the case with US and China today, as in China being historically like America was. But I think it's something to be conscious of.
All right, we're going to need a dose of optimism after that to take us away.
So before I get there, I want to tell you something funny. So OpenAI, okay? It was funny because I read these 2 headlines 2 hours apart. OpenAI comes out, goes, we plan to charge $20,000 a month for the specialized AI agents. $20,000 a month, okay? And I actually think if it's good enough, it's going to be worth it. 2 hours after that, Manus comes out, here's the free AI agent for you. So, China investor Louis Gav told me recently in London that when China enters an industry, profits disappear. And I think that's a great example of that. Dose of optimism for you. One from our friend Matt Ridley. So supposedly there was some big oil spill recently. But when these headlines come out, we always call the news, it's like a collection of the worst things happening on any given day. When you see a big oil spill, you seem to think, oh my God, these things are always happening. But this chart that Matt tweeted about, it shows the amount of oil spilled into oceans around the world over time. And you could see it's basically declined to almost nothing these days, which is due to several technological innovations, ships getting safer, navigation technology, all that type of stuff. So just important to put the bad news of the day into some context.
I love it. Score 1 for the environmental optimists.
There you go.
Viewers, thank you for watching. You can boost our optimism by hitting the subscribe button, ringing that bell, and leaving us a comment. This greatly helps our channel grow. We appreciate all of your support, and we will see you next week.